The billionaire tycoon fired the maid in public. What she revealed left him on his knees. The marble floors of the Harrington estate gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as guests mingled in the grand ballroom. Manhattan's elite had gathered for the annual charity gala, a showcase of wealth disguised as philanthropy. Alexander Harrington, CEO of Harrington Industries, stood at the center of it all, his tailored tuxedo and confident smile masking the ruthless businessman beneath. The evening had been perfect until Maria Santos appeared. She emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver tray, her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the designer gowns surrounding her. At 52, Maria had worked for the Harrington family for over a decade, cleaning their sprawling Fifth Avenue penthouse and Long Island estate with quiet dedication. Tonight, she was helping serve at the gala, an honor Alexander had reluctantly agreed to after his head of staff requested extra help. The accident happened in slow motion. A young socialite gesturing wildly while recounting her latest European adventure knocked into Maria as she passed. The tray tilted, sending champagne glasses crashing to the floor in a symphony of shattering crystal. The ballroom fell silent, all eyes turning to the scene unfolding near the marble staircase. "You clumsy fool." Alexander's voice cut through the silence like a blade. His face had turned crimson, veins visible at his temples as he strode toward Maria. The weight of 500 pairs of eyes pressed down on them both. Maria knelt among the broken glass, her hands trembling as she tried to collect the pieces. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harrington. It was an accident." "An accident?" Alexander's laugh was cold, bitter. "This is a $5,000 crystal set imported from Prague. Do you have any idea what you've just cost me?" The crowd pressed closer, smartphones emerging like vultures sensing carrion. Alexander's humiliation at being embarrassed in front of his peers transformed into rage, and Maria became his target. "You're fired," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Security will escort you out immediately. Don't expect a reference." Maria's face went pale, but she didn't flinch. She'd endured worse, much worse in her 52 years. Growing up in the Bronx projects, raising 3 children alone after her husband's death, working multiple jobs to keep food on the table. She knew hardship intimately. "Please, Mr. Harrington," she said quietly, rising to her feet with dignity intact. "I have nowhere else to go. This job, it's all I have." Alexander's eyes were ice. "Should have thought of that before you embarrassed me in front of my guests." The security guards approached, but Maria held up her hand. She looked around the ballroom, taking in the faces of New York's wealthiest citizens. Some looked uncomfortable, others openly amused by the drama unfolding before them. These were the same people who claimed to care about society's less fortunate, the same ones writing checks to feel better about their excess. "I understand," Maria said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "But before I go, there's something you should know." Alexander's expression shifted slightly. Something in Maria's tone had changed. The deference was gone, replaced by something that made him inexplicably nervous. "What could you possibly have to say that would interest me?" Maria smiled sadly, looking at the envelope in her hands. "This arrived for you yesterday. I signed for it while you were in your office." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "It's from St. Mary's Hospital. About the paternity test you requested." The blood drained from Alexander's face. Around them, the crowd leaned in, sensing the shift in power. Smartphones continued recording, capturing every moment of what was about to unfold. "You have no right." "I have every right," Maria interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Especially since it concerns my daughter." The ballroom had become a theater, and Alexander Harrington found himself center stage in a drama he never saw coming. His hands shook as he stared at Maria, the woman he'd just humiliated, now holding what appeared to be the key to his destruction. "Your daughter." Alexander's voice cracked slightly. Around them, the whispers began, a low hum of speculation that would soon become a roar. Maria nodded, clutching the envelope against her chest. "Elena Santos," She's 28 now, lives in Brooklyn, works as a nurse at Mount Sinai. The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Elena, the young woman who'd approached him 6 months ago, claiming to be his daughter from a brief relationship decades ago. He'd laughed her off, called security, had her removed from his office building, but she'd persisted, sending letters, making calls, until finally he'd agreed to a paternity test just to make her go away. "This is ridiculous," Alexander said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Some woman shows up claiming to be related to me, and I'm supposed to—" "Some woman." Maria's eyes flashed with fire. "That woman is my daughter. The daughter I raised alone after you disappeared from my life 29 years ago." The crowd pressed closer, phones recording every word. Alexander could see tomorrow's headlines forming. Billionaire's secret past exposed by fired Maid. His PR team would be in full damage control mode within hours. "I don't know what game you're playing," Alexander said, but his mind was racing, backward, trying to remember. 29 years ago, he'd been a different man, hungry, ambitious, climbing his way up the corporate ladder. There had been women, brief encounters, forgotten faces. No game, Alexander. Maria's use of his first name sent a chill through him. In all her years of service, she'd never called him anything but Mr. Harrington. Spring of 1996. You were working late hours at Morrison & Associates, trying to make partner. I was cleaning the offices at night, putting myself through community college. The memory surfaced unbidden. A young woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, working her way through school while supporting her family. They'd talked during those late nights, shared coffee from the break room, found comfort in each other's company. Maria had been different from the society women Alexander usually pursued. She'd been real, authentic, unimpressed by his ambitions. "That was a long time ago," Alexander said weakly. "Not long enough to forget your promises," Maria replied. "You said you'd help me finish school, said you cared about me. Then you got promoted and moved to Manhattan, and I never heard from you again." Alexander's throat felt dry. He remembered now, the guilt he'd felt about leaving her behind, the way he'd convinced himself it was better for both of them. He'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd never looked back. "I was pregnant," Maria continued, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I tried to find you, but your new firm wouldn't give me any information. So I did what I had to do. I raised Elena alone." "This is impossible," Alexander said, but even as the words left his mouth, he was calculating. The timeline fit. The resemblance he'd dismissed when Elena first approached him. The same determined jaw, the same green eyes that stared back at him from the mirror each morning. Maria held up the envelope. "The results are right here. Would you like me to read them aloud, or would you prefer to handle this privately?" The threat was clear. Alexander's reputation, his carefully constructed image, hung in the balance. Around them, New York's elite watched with barely concealed excitement. This was better than any Broadway show. Real drama with real consequences. "Maria, please," Alexander said, his voice barely a whisper. "Can we discuss this somewhere private?" But Maria shook her head. "You made this public when you fired me, in front of all these people. When you called me clumsy and worthless." Her voice grew stronger. "You want to know what's in this envelope? Elena is your daughter, and she's been trying to reach you because she needs help." Alexander's knees felt weak. "What kind of help?" "The kind that requires a father who gives a damn," Maria said. "But I can see that's asking too much." Alexander Harrington's world tilted on its axis as Maria's words echoed through the ballroom. The crystal chandelier above seemed to sway, though he knew it was just his vision blurring from shock. Around him, New York's most powerful people held their breath, waiting to see how the city's most ruthless businessman would handle this very public reckoning. "Elena needs help," Maria repeated, her voice cutting through his paralysis. "Medical help, the kind that costs more money than a cleaning woman can earn in 10 lifetimes. Alexander's mouth went dry. "What's wrong with her?" "Leukemia." The word fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of murmur through the crowd. She was diagnosed 8 months ago. Stage 3. She's been fighting it alone because she couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might save her life. The envelope in Maria's hand seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Alexander stared at it, understanding now why Elena had been so desperate to reach him. This wasn't about money or recognition. This was about survival. The treatment costs $400,000, Maria continued. Insurance won't cover it because it's experimental. Elena's been working double shifts when she's strong enough, but the chemo, her voice broke slightly. Some days she can barely stand. Alexander felt the weight of 500 pairs of eyes on him. His image, carefully crafted over decades, was crumbling in real time. But worse than that was the growing certainty in his chest. Elena was his daughter. The green eyes, the stubborn, set of her jaw when she'd confronted him in his office, the way she'd refused to back down despite his threats. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Tell you?" Maria's laugh was bitter. "I tried to tell you 29 years ago. I called your office dozens of times. I even showed up at your apartment building once, but the doorman wouldn't let me up. You'd moved on to bigger and better things, and there was no room in your new life for a pregnant cleaning woman." The truth hit Alexander like a physical blow. He remembered the calls, the messages he'd ignored. He'd been so focused on his ascent to power that he'd dismissed Maria as a distraction from his past. He'd convinced himself that cutting ties was kinder than stringing her along. "And now?" Alexander asked, dreading the answer. "Now Elena is dying," Maria said simply. "She has maybe 6 months without the treatment. With it, she might have years, maybe decades." She paused, looking around the ballroom filled with people who spent more on wine than most families earned in a year. "I thought maybe her father might want to know, might want to help." Alexander's mind raced. $400,000 was nothing to him. He spent more than that on a weekend in the Hamptons. But this wasn't about money. This was about 29 years of absence, about a daughter who'd grown up without him, about the kind of man he'd become. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Mount Sinai. She's been there for 2 weeks. The doctors wanted to try another round of conventional chemo, but her body..." Maria's voice trailed off. "She's strong, like her father. But she's tired, Alexander. So tired." The crowd was silent now, absorbed in this real-life drama playing out before them. Alexander could see his board members in the audience, their faces calculating the potential damage to the company's stock price. His ex-wife stood near the bar, her expression unreadable. His current girlfriend, a fashion model 20 years. His junior looked mortified. "I want to see her," Alexander said suddenly. Maria studied his face. "She doesn't want to see you. She gave up on having a father a long time ago. She only reached out because she was desperate." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because despite everything, you're still her father. And because she deserves better than dying alone while you throw parties for people who would abandon you." The moment your fortune disappeared, Alexander looked around the ballroom, seeing his guests with new eyes. Maria was right. These people weren't his friends. They were accessories to his success, fair-weather companions who would scatter the moment scandal touched him. "The paternity test," he said, nodding toward the envelope. 7% probability, Maria said without opening it. "I already know what it says. A mother knows." Alexander felt his knees buckle slightly. A daughter, a real daughter who was fighting for her life while he'd been worried about crystal glasses and his public image. The irony wasn't lost on him. He just humiliated the mother of his child in front of hundreds of people. "Maria," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not being there. For tonight." But Maria shook her head. "Don't apologize to me. I survived. I built a life, raised a daughter, found my own way. Your apology won't change the past." "Then what can I do?" Maria looked at him for a long moment, and Alexander saw something in her eyes he'd never noticed during all those years she'd cleaned his homes. Strength, dignity, and a fierce protective love for her daughter. "Be her father," she said simply. For whatever time she has left. The elevator at Mount Sinai Hospital moved with agonizing slowness as Alexander ascended to the 7th floor. He'd left the gala without a word to his guests, ignoring the flood of questions and camera flashes that followed him to his car. Maria sat beside him in the back of his Bentley, her worn hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the city lights, streaming past the window. She might not want to see you, Maria had warned him during the ride. She's been disappointed by promises before. Now, standing outside room 712, Alexander felt more nervous than he had during any board meeting or corporate acquisition. Through the small window, he could see a young woman lying in the hospital bed, her dark hair thin from chemotherapy treatments, her face pale but determined as she read a book by the bedside light. Elena Santos, his daughter. The nurses know. Me, Maria said softly. I've been here every day for 2 weeks, but you… She paused. You're a stranger to her. Remember that. Alexander nodded, his throat tight. He'd spent the car ride learning about Elena's life, how she'd graduated valedictorian from high school, earned a nursing degree through night school while working, full-time, dedicated her life to caring for others. She'd never married, had no children, had poured all her energy into helping people heal. Can I go in alone? He asked. Maria hesitated. 5 minutes. If she asks you to leave, you leave. Alexander pushed open the door and Elena looked up from her book. The resemblance was unmistakable now that he was looking for it. The same green eyes, the same determined jawline, even the same way of tilting her head when concentrating. But where Alexander's eyes held the hardness of decades in corporate warfare, Elena's still held compassion despite her suffering. Mr. Harrington, she said, her voice weary but unsurprised. I wondered if you'd show up. Elena. He stood awkwardly by the door, this powerful man who commanded boardrooms reduced to uncertainty by his own daughter. How are you feeling? She closed her book, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and studied him. Like I'm dying, which, according to my doctors, I am. The bluntness of her words hit him harder than any hostile takeover he'd ever faced. The experimental treatment costs more money than I'll earn in 20 years, Elena finished. I know, I've run the numbers. She paused. But I assume you already know that, or you wouldn't be here. Alexander moved closer to her bed, noting the IV lines, the monitors beeping softly, the medicine bottles lined up on her bedside table. Your mother told me tonight. At the gala. Ah yes, your gala. Elena's smile was sardonic. Where you fired her in front of half of Manhattan. I heard it's already trending on social media. Alexander winced. I was wrong. About everything. Were you? Elena's eyes never left his face. Or are you just embarrassed that your dirty laundry got aired in public? The question hung between them like a challenge. Alexander could feel Elena measuring him, testing whether he was the same man who'd had her thrown out of his office building 6 months ago. I didn't know, he said finally. About you, I mean. Your mother never told me she was pregnant. She tried. Elena's voice was matter of fact. I found the letters she wrote but never sent. The phone logs from when she tried to reach you. She didn't tell me about them until I got sick. Alexander sank into the visitor's chair beside her bed. Why did you wait so long to contact me? Elena was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city skyline. Pride, I suppose. Mom raised me to believe I didn't need anyone, especially not a father who'd abandoned us. But when the doctors told me about the experimental treatment, she shrugged. Desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. The $400,000, Alexander said. I can transfer it tonight. Can you? Elena turned back to him and he saw something in her expression that made him uncomfortable. Just like that? Write a check and make it all go away? I want to help. Why? Because you feel guilty? Because you're worried about your reputation? Or because you actually care about a daughter you've never bothered to know? The question cut deep, because Alexander wasn't sure of the answer himself. Was this about Elena, or was it about salvaging his image? Was he trying to help her, Or just trying to make himself feel better? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe all of those reasons. Elena nodded as if she'd expected his honesty. At least you're not lying to me. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 28 years of absence filling the space between them. Alexander studied his daughter's face, trying to memorize features he'd never seen as a child, milestones he'd never celebrated, tears he'd never wiped away. "Tell me about yourself," he said finally. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What would you like to know? My favorite color, my first word? How I felt when other kids talked about their fathers and I had to pretend it didn't matter?" "All of it," Alexander said quietly. "I want to know all of it." For the first time, Elena's hard expression softened slightly. "It's too late for bedtime stories, Mr. Harrington." "Alexander," he corrected. "And maybe it's too late for some things. But not for everything." Elena considered this, her fingers tracing the spine of her book. "Why should I let you into my life now, when I might only have months left?" "Because," Alexander said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him, "maybe those months could be different for both of us." 3 months later, Alexander Harrington sat in the same chair beside Elena's hospital bed, but everything else had changed. The experimental treatment was working, slowly, gradually, but working. Elena's color had returned. Her hair was growing. Back in soft curls, and most importantly, the determined light in her eyes had been joined by something that looked like hope. "The latest blood work looks promising," Dr. Patricia Chen said, reviewing Elena's chart. "Your white cell count is approaching normal range, and the bone marrow biopsy shows significant improvement." Alexander felt his chest tighten with relief. These monthly progress reports had become the most important meetings of his life, more crucial than any board presentation he'd ever given. "Does this mean I can go home soon?" Elena asked. Home had become a complicated concept. Elena's small Brooklyn apartment had been deemed unsuitable for her recovery, so Alexander had quietly arranged for her to stay in a private suite at the hospital with round-the-clock nursing care. It was luxury she'd initially resisted, but Maria had convinced her to accept it. "Another 2 weeks," Dr. Chen said. "But your prognosis is excellent. The experimental treatment has exceeded our expectations." After the doctor left, Alexander and Elena sat in comfortable silence. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, built on small conversations and shared meals in the hospital cafeteria. Alexander had learned about Elena's work at the pediatric ward, her volunteer work at a homeless shelter, her dreams of opening a free clinic someday. Elena had gradually let him into her world, sharing stories of her childhood, her struggles, her triumphs. "I have something to tell you," Elena said, setting down the medical journal she'd been reading. Even during treatment, she'd continued studying, determined to return to work as soon as possible. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about making the most of whatever time we have." Alexander nodded. In their many conversations, he'd tried to express what he couldn't quite put into words. That meeting her had changed him, in ways he was only beginning to understand. "I want to know about the clinic," he said. Elena blinked in surprise. "What clinic?" "The one you want to open. The free clinic. Tell me about it." Elena's face lit up in a way Alexander had never seen before. "You remember that? I remember everything you've told me." For the next hour, Elena described her vision. A community health center in the Bronx where she'd grown up, providing free medical care to families who couldn't afford it. She'd researched locations, studied funding models, even drafted a business plan during her sickest days, when hope for her own recovery seemed impossible. "It would cost about $2 million to get started," she said finally. "Equipment, staff, building renovation. It's a dream, really, not something I could ever actually do." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "What if you could?" "What do you mean? What if the money wasn't an issue? What if you could make it happen?" Elena studied his face carefully. "Alexander, you've already done so much. The treatment, the hospital suite, making sure Mom doesn't have to work while she stays with me. I can't ask for more. You're not asking. I'm offering. Why? It was the same question she'd asked him that first night, and Alexander had spent 3 months finding the answer. Because I've spent my entire life building things that don't matter. Companies, wealth, a reputation. But what have I actually built? What legacy am I leaving? He paused, looking at his daughter. This remarkable woman who'd grown up without him but had somehow become everything he'd failed to be. Compassionate, selfless, dedicated to helping others. You want to heal people, he continued. You want to make the world better. That's a legacy worth building. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I don't want your money because you feel guilty. This isn't about guilt anymore, Alexander said. It's about pride. I'm proud of who you are, Elena, proud to be your father even if I don't deserve the title. You're trying to deserve it now, Elena said softly. That has to count for something. Alexander reached over and took her hand, something he'd never done before. I can't change the past. I can't be there for your first steps or your graduation, or all the moments I missed. But I can be here for what comes next. Elena squeezed his hand. What comes next? You get better. You go home, you open your clinic. And maybe if you'll have me, I can be part of it. Not as a donor or a benefactor, but as your father. Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she smiled. The first real smile Alexander had seen. From her, I'd like that, she said. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the main lobby of the Elena Santos Community Health Center, watching his daughter cut the ribbon at the grand opening. Maria stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter's dream become reality. The local news crews had come to cover the story. The billionaire who'd found his long-lost daughter and changed his life. But Alexander barely noticed the cameras. He was too busy watching Elena greet the first patients, seeing the joy on her face as she welcomed families into the clinic that would serve their community for generations to come. She's remarkable, Maria said softly. She gets that from her mother, Alexander replied. Maria smiled. She gets her stubborn streak from her father. Alexander laughed, and for the first time in his life he understood what true wealth looked like. It wasn't in bank accounts or corporate holdings. It was in the smile of a daughter who'd forgiven him, in the lives that would be saved by her work, in the legacy they were building together. He'd lost everything at that gala 9 months ago. His reputation, his carefully constructed image, his sense of who he thought he was. But in losing it all, he'd found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found his daughter, and in finding her, he'd found himself.